Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest Angelou Ezeilo, and she's here today to share with us her new book, Engage, Connect, Protect: Empowering Diverse Youth as Environmental Leaders. Now, Angelou is the founder and CEO of the Greening Youth Foundation. A 2016 fellow, she is a member of the National Center for the Civil and Human Rights Women's in Solidarity Society. She's on the boards of the Atlanta Auburn Society and the South Fork Conservancy. She's also an advisory board member for the Arabia Mountain National Heritage Area and Outdoor Afro. And she's on the steering committee for the New Children's Welfare Initiative, a network of 22 change makers working together to promote children's well-being across the country. So let's welcome to the show, Angelou Ezeilo.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You know, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. I have to ask you, what was the inspiration behind writing this book?
Great question. And I never get tired of that question because I think for the most part, I wanted to share the story and my journey as an African-American woman working in this space. But I also wanted to debunk a lot of the myths out there that people of color are not interested in the environment and aren't doing great work in the environmental space. But lastly, I wanted to provide resources to maybe the mainstream environmental organizations or institutions out there that are looking to partner with organizations and schools that are, really training this next generation of diverse environmental leaders.
That's so important because everyone, and we were kind of chatting about this just a little bit ago, everyone has a different perspective. Yep. And it would be wrong for us, and not really, very thoughtful to just approach it from one perspective when there's so many different perspectives out there.
Exactly. And I often quote Chimamanda Ngozi, who is a Nigerian writer, and she has this amazing YouTube, actually it's a TED Talk that's called Danger of a Single Narrative. And, so she kind of talks about just, how people view her as an African person and, what that means. And in most cases, what they think it doesn't mean. But I kind of liken that to the environmental sector and how, we seem to have this prototype of who you need to be, what you need to look like in order to be either working or even recreating out in the outdoors, in the great outdoors. And, we just really, as we move towards a society that's increasingly more diverse and more brown, we just really need to change that narrative.
So you talk about environmental leaders. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many fields now within the environmental sector that, we're really, given the fact that right now we're dealing with a climate crisis. I mean, many people, including myself, call it a global emergency. So, innovation is something we critically need right now all across the globe. So, it's not just park rangers and, people working out in recreation in the outdoors that we're looking for. We're looking for the scientists, the engineers, the lawyers, many people in the natural resource management field are needed, leaders within those fields, so that we can really move towards creative solutions to some of the problems that we're currently facing. And I think that a lot of the hope resides in these young, diverse people that are now being introduced to the field, being exposed to the opportunities that exist within the field. And quite frankly, I'm really excited about it.
So I'm sure this is a very basic question. You probably get this all the time. When we look at just the current discussion and in regards to our environment, how can this create exclusion?
Yeah. I think, Dr. Dorcetta Taylor, I'm not sure if you're familiar, something called the Green 2.0 report that she did, I think back in 2014, and she did kind of updates in 2016. She looked at maybe 186 environmental orgs And within that were federal land management agencies, NGOs, as well as corporations that had like an environmental focus. And her key findings were that, there's like this green insiders club that's being created because within those 186 companies, only like 14 or 16% were in C-suites, people of color. And there's like this unconscious bias that's happening within the field that I think people aren't even necessarily aware that they have, like this it's like an eternal stereotype, she calls it, and in which people are of color are still being deemed as, that's not really for them. They have too many other pressing issues that they're focusing on. And then lastly, another key finding is that there's this insular recruiting that's happening, in which people are just hiring themselves. White people are just hiring themselves within these different organizations. And it's mainly because it's just the easiest thing to do. And it's the most comfortable thing to do, like bringing in people that maybe have different interests in music and culture and food and what have you is a little uncomfortable for some. So sometimes it's just the easiest thing to do to hire your, friend's cousin or your coworker's uncle or what have you, because it just kind of easily and seamlessly fits into the groove of what's happening within that organization.
Yeah, that is something to really kind of consider, and it's interesting because your book also talks about a new paradigm for having environmental consciousness. And so for our listeners, that might be something that's a little new, and I'd love for you to expand on that.
Yeah, I think what I'm saying there is when I say a new paradigm, it's a new vision of what this environmental sector should be. It really needs to be, as inclusive as possible. And, when I say shifting that paradigm, I'm really, talking about starting at a very young age. We do environmental education and we go into schools and we talk to young people, K through 12 even, about environmental literacy and how they can be stewards and, show them images of themselves in the outdoors. So we're now shifting, like we're planting that seed at a very young age of, the work that they could be doing in the outdoors and what their responsibility is. So they then grow up and they're now looking for these internships, and perhaps they've also, falling in love and have this, love affair with nature, as I did at a very young age. And perhaps now their parents and people that are influencers in their lives will then recommend career pathways in the environmental sector, which is something that didn't happen for me necessarily, which is why I'm a lawyer, because my parents didn't see people that looked like them or me in the environmental sector, despite the fact that I had all of these traits and characteristics that demonstrated that I enjoyed and I really love the outdoors and probably would do well in it. They encouraged me to go into a stable and very safe career pathway for a young brown woman, and that was law. So it took me until I became a lawyer, and then was doing corporate transactional law, for me to really say, well, wait a minute, I really would like to explore perhaps, doing land preservation. And that's kind of what led me to the work with the Trust for Public Land, a national NGO.
What a story. And I know you have quite a story. You dive into this into your book, that you had a life altering event, and we don't necessarily have to go into that. But,
Yeah.
How did nature become this great healing, just kind of element for you as you're going through your own healing process?
Yeah. And your listeners will have to get my book to read exactly what happened to me. But thank goodness I'm healthy now. But one of the big aids in in me getting healthy again and recuperating is nature. So my therapist literally told me, what I'm to deal with a lot of the anxiety that you're having, I really need you to get to walk more. And I was like, sure, because I was used to kind of, I had schedules and, things to do lists, because of course I was a mom, a wife, a business owner, all these different things. So everything was structured in my life. So I was like, sure, I'll just, walk longer on the treadmill. And he's like, no, I need you to get outside and walk on trails, walk in parks. And I don't want you to wear earbuds or ear pods, nothing. I want you to hear, the sounds of nature and allow it to heal you. And that's exactly what happened. And that was actually before I even learned about forest bathing and, how doctors are now writing prescriptions for people to get outdoors. And Richard Lou wrote a book, Nature as, a Healer, Nature RX or something. So yes, now there's so much research that proves that even looking at trees when you're in an office has a healing effect on you, let alone being out in nature. So it's something that's really, really encouraged and, prescribed in most cases for people who are dealing with chronic illnesses.
Oh my goodness. I wish we all had a doctor like that.
I know, right?
Oh my goodness. Because I've gone through my own challenges and I'm sure everybody has. Everyone has challenges. We're not devoid of that, And to have a doctor that says, hey, get outside, leave the earbuds at home and just be, immerse yourself in nature. I mean, what a gift that is.
Exactly. I mean, his goal was to not have me be heavily medicated, So,
Mm-hmm.
I certainly appreciated that and certainly didn't mind being medicated by the sound of birds and trees.
Well, and it's interesting because when we look at some areas that are, maybe they're more cityscape, where there's very little greenery
Yes.
involved. And
Yes.
you talk about this in your book about like how income can really divide the experiences that people have in green spaces.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that, and actually Mickey Fern, who was a deputy director for the National Park Service, his voice always, I hear it in my head when, organizations often want to bring, students and young people from inner cities, to these far flung, amazing, and it doesn't take away from the beauty of these national parks and these iconic parks like Yellowstone and Yosemite or what have you. But he always said, to me, I think that's a little cruel because once you take them out there, then you don't really provide them with a path to return or a vehicle to get back to that place. So it's kind of like, here's this amazing place, but you're never going to see it again. So transportation is a major and critical issue that causes lots of barriers with people who come from underrepresented or disadvantaged communities to getting to these different places. So one of the things that I often talk about are local parks, state parks, like everybody has some kind of green space in their community. It may not be as much as others. It may not be that national park that's in your backyard, but I encourage people to get out even to their local parks and to protect their local parks and be stewards of their local parks because it's that important for your health.
I know no matter where we are, what community we're in, there's always greenery somewhere.
Exactly.
Even New York, I mean, they've got Central Park, so.
Exactly. And they have so many other linear parks and pocket parks, so, it's really hard nowadays. And working for an NGO like the Trust for Public Land, who really, or the National Recreation Park Association, these organizations really are fixated and it's their mission to make sure communities are all within walking range of a park, a particular, radius from a park or mileage from a park. So, with those organizations, most communities now can say that they have parks within their immediate vicinity. Thank goodness.
Well, you have such a great resource. I mean, your appendix is amazing.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Because, that was one of the things I was like, I know that this is probably going to be a lot for my publisher, but I really wanted to provide many resources for people. So as you said, yeah, I have an appendix that, just lists environmentally environmental organizations led by people of color, and I break it down state by state. So there's no excuse anymore where an organization is saying, I really would love to recruit or engage more people of color. I just don't know where to look. Now, look no more. This book is here for you. You can look at the appendix and go to the state that you're looking for and organizations. Obviously, it's an organic list and it's as comprehensive as we could make it at the time, and more are being added, which is a great thing. But it's certainly a good starting point. And then I also have an appendix for HBCU, historically Black colleges and universities, listed by state, with the different majors that may be germane for environmental orgs, as well as an appendix that has Hispanic serving institutions. And then lastly, tribal colleges and universities. So there literally is no more excuses that can be had.
Well, it's nice to have that as a resource and have people look at this as possible career choices. And so in your book, you talk about how the importance of having, culturally relevant curriculum. And I think
Yes.
a lot of times people just don't even know that's an issue.
Exactly. And it's funny because that's actually how this whole book deal came to me. I was at an International Children and Nature Network conference in Vancouver, Canada, where there was a new society whom I love. They are the best publishing company ever because their mission so aligns with what my book is about and what our foundation is about. But they had all the books displayed there because the books that they publish are very relevant for the attendees that were attending this conference. However, I asked the woman there at the kind of bookstore that they had set up if they had any books that addressed culturally relevant material for students. And this is kind of at the beginning of the conference. And she was like, oh, I'm sure we do have that. Just please come back and check before you leave so that I can share these books with you. So, I kind of forgot about it. But as I'm leaving, she calls me over and she's like, can you believe I never found a book that dealt specifically with what you were requesting? And I was like, well, the truth is, I was really surprised when you said you had it. I was hoping you had it, but I haven't really been able to find it anywhere. And she's like, well, that means you need to write the book. Here is my publisher's card, Rob West card, and, let me have your card. You must write this book. And then the rest is kind of history because he actually reached out. And, that's how, Nick Childs, who actually is my brother, we started this whole project of writing this book, which was so much fun.
So let's say we have high schools that don't have, even environmental placement as something as a consideration. How can they go through so they could start prepping our students for this?
Yeah, I think that now through life science, citizen science, there are many programs that could be brought in. I think the science department is a really great place to start for high schools. But one of the things that I'm seeing is that high school students need service projects. So one way that our organization has been able to plug in with a lot of high schools is through the service projects, the environmental service projects that we're able to provide them. We have a 4.5 acre farm in the heart of Atlanta, Georgia. So we have a community garden there. We have livestock. We have, crops, a hoop house. We have all sorts of things that young people, urban garden, young people can do to help us maintain this farm, but also to get them to put their hands in the earth and to understand the importance of, locally grown food and the resource that is right there in their community. So I think that to answer your question, I think that there are many angles that one who's trying to bring environmental literacy to a high school could utilize to make it really relevant and to align it with what the students or even the teachers are trying to teach the students.
And how important is that? I think, having this discussion, I love having discussions like this where, maybe it's not something as well known, but people, once we pay attention to what's going on, drastic changes can be made. and things can really start happening for people that maybe would never be exposed to becoming, like an environmental leader,
Exactly. And I think you really hit it, because I mean, I think intentionality is really what we're talking about. Because when I mentioned earlier the unconscious bias and, the insular recruiting and all this kind of stuff, it's just things that we get into a habit of doing without really being aware of it, that it may be detrimentally impacting or affecting a certain community or a certain demographic. So, what I say when because I'm asked to speak all over. In fact, I just got back from Hamburg, Germany, speaking to a group, and I just talk about the importance of being intentional with the engagement of diverse audiences in this message. And in fact, the relevancy of organizations and of people, and even of the sustainability of our planet, depends on it. We really have to be more conscious about engagement and going outside of our comfort zones to make sure that we're being as inclusive as possible with this work.
Yeah, without a doubt. My goodness. It's interesting. The words that we use can also create exclusion, which I found very interesting.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You're probably referring to my chapter on environmental jargon. Yeah, because I mean, I think that there are words that, we use, or acronyms that we use when you're within. So it's kind of like a double, I could see both sides of it. Being a lawyer, I understood that there were certain, terms and abbreviated terms and acronyms that you would use that were kind of to show that there's a connection, like, a solidarity amongst people. Like, you're in this club and so am I, so we can speak this language together. But it also has the effect of excluding people and making people feel that they can't be a part of something. And I think that, within the environmental sector, we have to be really careful with that, because if we want to make this information, this awareness, and certainly the importance of being stewards, we need to make sure that it's accessible for all. And just because you don't know what permaculture or alternative energy, like, all, there's so many different terms now that we use, we want to make sure we meet everybody where they are and don't make them feel uncomfortable if they don't know some of this language. And I talk about, organic, and, even with food, what that means. Like, we talk about in classes that we go to, the importance of, because quite frankly, I couldn't just focus on environmental literacy um, in a tunnel. It was hard to not look at all of the other issues plaguing, the demographic that we were focused on. A lot of these these children of color were dealing with diabetes and, had hypertension, all these different things. So, I had to talk about portion control and, food choices and where your food comes from, and how, eating organic, is a healthy thing. But, I got pushback. Ruth and I, who was our education director at the time, she's now retired. We got pushback from parents like, you can't tell our kids to eat organic food. I can't afford to get organic food. So we shifted a lot of that. And in most cases, I can't always get organic food. I go to certain stores and Whole Foods or what have you, and I have to make choices about what things, there's a dirty dozen. There's certain things that you want to buy that's organic, when you're eating the peeling and things like that. But in other cases, eating locally grown food, or, food from a farmer's market, there are other things that you can do. So not providing those options to the young people, we learned that, we kind of smacked ourselves on the hands, because we were limiting the parents and putting them in a box because they couldn't necessarily afford these options that we were saying were the most healthy. So it caused us to kind of look at the bigger picture of, what we could be doing and what we could be talking to these students about in terms of options available for them in their community.
Yeah, it's such a big deal. It's interesting. You get some states like Colorado where a majority of the food is shipped in because the altitude, they have difficulty growing some things. And
Right.
so you look at that and you're like, okay, on top of that, even trying to get it organic, good luck. So,
Exactly, exactly, exactly.
so
Yeah,
you,
so there's just so much that, and I think parents are frustrated. I mean, I understand, like literally from week to week on the news, you're learning about what you should be eating, what you shouldn't be eating, and what label to look out for. So it's a lot. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is that we need to make sure we're giving information so that it's, accessible, and then even in some cases in bite-sized portions, so that it's not overwhelming. The last thing we need children and young people to do is to be overwhelmed by yet another thing. And climate crisis in and of itself, climate change is something that is really, it weighs heavily on a lot of young adults, millennials, young people's minds. So in order to keep them very active and not just checking out, we just need to make sure we are intentionally and just very conscious with how we engage
well, Angela, we can talk forever. I mean, I love your
them.
book and love the work that you're doing and just applaud you. Where can our listeners learn more about becoming part of the community and getting engaged and also about your book?
Yes, awesome. Thank you for asking that question. And I really enjoyed our conversation as well. I just felt like I was talking to a girlfriend. So thank you for your interviewing
Oh.
style. But just so you know, I mean, to find out more information about me and how, maybe if you're interested in me coming and do a workshop or a speaking engagement, you can visit www.angelouezeilo.com. And then Greening Youth Foundation is the nonprofit organization that I founded over 14 years ago. Our corporate headquarters are in Atlanta, Georgia, but we work all over the country. And in fact, we work internationally as well. We have a satellite office in Nigeria, in West Africa. So that is www.gyfoundation.org. And again, that's www.gyfoundation.org. But you can also find me on LinkedIn, as we discussed, and certainly Facebook and Instagram and so forth. So I would love to hear from your listeners, because I think your listeners are certainly like-minded. And, I would love to get help in spreading these messages that I have.
Well, I think it's important not only to get, youth, but also, youth that may be not so exposed to the environment involved.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
everything we can do to help our environment, because my goodness, we're in such a place that we need to take some really considerations into what's happening. So I just applaud you, Angelou, and thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Marianne, for having me. It's been a joy.
Well, Angelou, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today. It's been such a great honor to spend this time with you. If you'd like to check out Angelou's book, Engage, Connect, Protect, it's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. You can also visit her website at gyfoundation.org for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just what moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Friday and Saturday at 5 p.m. Pacific and 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.